What time it is? Gotcha! Yes! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! We're back! Hi, lovelies. Hold on, I'm gonna answer a message very quickly. I hope everybody's having a good day. All right. Now we are in full effect. Making sure that my notifications are off so we won't have any interruptions. There we go. All right. Hi, y'all. I am back with story time. I know you all who have been tuning in saw me Thursday and Friday night for story time with Chris for the adults. I still owe you all some chapters of The Hobbit, but I have a special guest that's going to be joining me on those later chapters because hopefully they're going to be voicing the character of Smaug in a way that is going to be really cool and dynamic. My selfie light is having a bit of issues, so I am waiting until I can get a new one at the most opportune time. I have a lot of expenses coming up at the moment that I need to take care of that take precedence, so thank you all so much for your patience. As always, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max, relax, and chillaxing time. In between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, any time that you want to hear a highly animated voice with wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. And no, I'm not under the weather. I just really wanted a glass of orange juice. Ooh, actually, I'm gonna play that. There we go. Come on, music. As I always say, I don't own the music that you're listening to in the background, which is brought to you yet again and again and again by our wonderful friend, Mr. Ambiance. Please like, share, subscribe onto their channel, Mr. Ambiance, AMBIENCE, Ambiance. Mr. MISTER. Can I have the definition, please? Can I have the country of origin, please? Can I have it in a sentence? What? That is neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and get started in our story. Now, the last time we were here, Will ended up finding, if I'm not mistaken, the sign of fire. There's the sign of bronze, wood, stone, fire, and... Oh, you know what? We're just going to look. We're just going to look because reading is helpful. Hold on. Because it was in... Hold on, I want to make sure we got the right number of sides as we continue this story. I know. I'm sorry, y'all. Give me a moment. I just want to make sure we got the right amount. Because the last time we were here, the dark ended up causing a great blizzard to happen. And all of the people within the village had to go to Miss Greythorn's manor, her big mansion, and get everybody inside and give them food and clothing and heat and a place to be safe during the storm. But the dark was about to bury the entire village in snow. But Will, thankfully, with the help of the other old ones, was able to find the sign of fire and was able to quickly and magically melt away the blizzard and snow to get everybody home safely. But his mother, Will's mom, has had an accident. She has fallen down the stairs, and it's alluded that the dark may be at fault as to why it happens. See, kids, no matter what happens in life, darkness will never win. It is goodness and honesty and love and the power of love that will always triumph over evil. And that's what this story teaches us, is that no matter how bleak or dark a situation may be, goodness can and will win. Isn't it nice to know that good can conquer evil? The truth we all believe in by and by. How to live our lives for you and I know it was in this last chapter. I'm really at a loss, y'all. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna find this. Graphic. Okay, I'm gonna find it at another point, and that's okay. That's fine. So, we got the side of bronze, stone, wood, bronze, stone, wood. My brain is blanking. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's okay. This is why. It's why we are supposed to write notes. Notes are helpful. That's for my own personal note. Let's go ahead and get into the story, because Will and his adventures with the dark and fighting against them is far from over. But he has, if I'm not mistaken, 5 signs now. I think he's missing one last sign, I think. My apologies. Let's go ahead. The King of Fire and Water. James still looked pale and distressed even when the doctor was safely arrived and examining Miss Stanton in the living room. He drew aside his nearest brothers, who happened to be Paul and Will, and moved them out of earshot of the rest. He said unhappily, "Mary's disappeared." Disappeared? Honestly, I told her not to go. I didn't think she would. I thought she'd be too scared. Worry had said stoical James, close to tears. Go where? Paul said sharply. Out to the manor. It was after Max went to get you. Gwenny and Bar went in the living room with Mum. Mary and I were in the kitchen making some tea, and she got all upset and said Max had been gone far too long and we ought to go and check whether anything had happened to him. I told her not to be so daft. So of course we shouldn't go. But just then Gwen called me to go and make up the fire in there, and when I came back, Mary was gone, and so were her coat and boots. He sniffed. I couldn't see any sign of where she'd gone. Outside, the rain had started and there weren't any footprints. I was just going to go out after her without saying anything because the girls had enough to worry about, but then you came and I thought she'd be with you. Only she wasn't. Oh dear, said James woefully. She's a silly fool. Never mind, Paul said. She can't have gone far. Just go and wait for a good moment to explain to Dad, and tell him I've gone out to pick her up. I'll take Will. We're both still dressed for it. Good, said Will, who had hastily been trying to think of arguments for his going. When they were out of the rain again, the snow already beginning to squelch gray-white underfoot, Paul said, Don't you think it's time to tell me what this is all about? What? Said Will, astounded. What are you mixed up in? Paul said, his blue pale eyes peering severely through the heavy spectacles. Nothing. Look, if Mary's going off might have something to do with it, you're absolutely got to explain. Oh dear. He looked at Paul's threatening determination and wondered how you explained to an elder brother that an 11-year-old was no longer quite an 11-year-old, but a creature subtly different from the human race, fighting for its survival. You didn't, of course. He said, It's these, I think. Glancing cautiously about him, he tucked his jacket and sweater clear of his belt and showed Paul the sides. They're antiques. Just buckle things that Mr. Dawson gave me for my birthday. But they must be really valuable because 2 or 3 weird people keep on turning up trying to get a hold of them. One man chased me up Hundercombe Lane once, and that old tramp was mixed up with them somehow. That was why I didn't want to bring him home the day we found him in the snow. He thought how very improbable it all sounded. Paul said, and that fellow in the manor, the new butler. Lion, isn't it? Isn't he mixed up with these clowns? Oh, no, Will said hastily. He's a friend of mine. Paul looked at him for a moment, expressionless. Will thought of his patient understanding that night in the attic at the beginning, of the way he played the old flute, and knew that if there were any one of his brothers that he could confide in, it would be Paul. But it was indeed out of the question. Paul said, Obviously you haven't told me the half of it, but that'll have to do. I take it you think these antique chasers might have nobbled Mary as some sort of hostage. They had reached the end of the driveway. The rain beat down on them, hard yet not vicious. It rained down the snowbanks, poured from the trees, turned the road into the beginning of a rapidly moving stream. They looked up and down in vain. Will said they must have. I mean, she'd have gone straight towards the manor, so why didn't we see her on our way home? We'll go that way anyway to check. Paul tilted his head suddenly and glared at the sky. It's this rain. It's ridiculous. Just suddenly out of all that snow, and it's so much warmer, too. Makes no sense. He splattered off up the running stream that was Huntercombe Lane and glanced at Will with a baffled half-grin. But then a lot of things aren't making much sense to me at the moment. Ah, Will said, no. He splashed away noisily to cover his remorse and peered through the sheets of rain from some sign of sister. The noise around them was astonishing now, an ocean noise of spattering foam and washing shingle and breaking waves as the wind brought the waves slushing rhythmically through the trees, a most ancient noise as they stood on the edge of some great ocean before men or their ancestors were ever born. Up the road they went, peering and doggedly calling, anxious now. Everything they saw became strange all over again, as the rain carved the snow into new lanes and hillocks. But when they came to one corner, Will knew suddenly very well where they were. He saw Paul duck defensively behind one raised arm, heard the harsh, raucous croaking abruptly loud and then gone, saw even through the flying rain the flurry of black feathers as the gaggle of rooks swooped low past their heads. Paul straightened slowly, staring. What on earth? Get over on the other side of the road, Will said, pushing him firmly sideways. The rooks go sort of crazy sometimes. I've seen it before. Another shrieking swoop of birds came at Paul from behind, driving him forward, while the first dived again to force Will against the snowbank along the edge of the dirt-buried road. Again they came, and again Will wondered, dodging, whether his brother had realized that they were being herded like sheep, driven where the rooks wanted them to go. But even as he wondered, he knew that it was too late. The gray sheet of rain had separated them entirely. He had no idea where Paul had gone. He yelled in panic, "Paul! Paul!" But as the old one in him took control, calming the fear, he cut off the shout. This was not a matter for ordinary human beings, even of his own family. He should be glad to be alone. He knew now that Mary must be caught somewhere, held by the dark. Only he had any chance of getting her back. He stood in the driving rain, staring about him. The light was dying rapidly. Will unbuckled his belt and strapped it around his right wrist. Then he said a word in the old speech and held up his arm, and from the signs a steady pathway of light beamed out as from a torch. It shone unruffled brown water, where the road was becoming a river, deeper and flowing fast. He remembered that Merriman had said before that the most dangerous peak of the Dark's power would come at 12th night. Was that time now come? He had lost his place in the days. They ran into one another in his mind. Water washed at the edge of his boot as he stood wondering. He jumped hastily backward to the snowbank edging the wood, and a brown wave in the road river took a large bite out of the snow wall on which he had been standing. In the light from the signs, Will saw that now other chunks of dirty snow and ice bobbed in the water as it flowed past. It was gradually undercutting the hard-packed banks left on either side by the snowplow and carrying away broken pieces like miniature icebergs. Which, by the way, I'm not super familiar with the celebratory event of Twelfth Night. If I'm not mistaken, it is a Anglo-Saxon, aka British or English traditional holiday, and I will get you more information on that another time. But for those who know about Twelfth Night, please comment respectfully. But I'm pretty sure it's a festival that happens like one night out of the year. It's kind of like St. George's Day in April, which is coming up. And we will read that story. I missed last year, but I will not miss this year on reading that story. I love St. George and the Dragon. It's an amazing story. But Twelfth Night is also a William Shakespeare play. So, something to research on. And if I'm not mistaken, it is a comedy. Because Shakespeare had histories, tragedies, comedies, and... Because The Tempest is in a weird category that is neither a comedy or a tragedy. It's a fourth category. So there's histories, tragedies, comedies, and then I'm pretty sure the last category is fantasy, but I will definitely look more into that. Because I know The Tempest is not within those first three I mentioned. It's in the latter. which, by the way, The Tempest is my favorite Shakespearean play. That and Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a comedy. It's great. That and As You Like It. It's a really good one. Another time. Other things were there in the water, too. He saw a bucket bob past him and a tufted object that looked like a sack of hay. The water must be rising high enough to carry things away from people's gardens, perhaps his own among them. How could it rise so fast? As if in answer, and he remembered that the ground underneath him must still be frozen bone hard by the great cold that had paralyzed the land before the rain came. Nowhere would this rain be able to soak into the soil. The thawing of the land would take far longer than the melting of the snow, and in the meantime the snow water had nowhere to go, no alternative but to run over the surface of the frozen countryside looking for a river to join. The floods would be dreadful, Will thought, worse than they had ever been before, worse even than the cold. But a voice broke in on him in a shout through the rushing water and roaring rain. He stumbled over the slush-edged mounds of snow to peer through the murk. The shout came again. "Will, over here!" "Paul?" Will cried hopefully, but he knew it was not Paul's voice. "Here, over here!" The shout came from the river road itself out in the dark. Will held up the signs. The light beamed out over the churning water and showed him what he took at first for clouds of steam. Then he saw that the curling steam was the puffing of breath, great deep breaths from a gigantic horse's standing foursquare in the water, small wild waves foaming past its knees. Will saw the broad head, the long chestnut mane plastered wet to the neck, and he knew that this was either Castor or Pollux, one of the two great Shire horses from Dawson's farm. The light from the signs flicked higher. He saw old George, muffled in black oilskins, perched high on the back of the massive horse. "Over here, Will, through the water before it rises too fast. We have work to do. Come on." He had never heard old George sound demanding before. This was the old one, not the amiable old farmhand. Leaning against the horse's neck, the old man urged it closer through the water. "Come on, Polly. Come by, Sir Pollux." And big Pollux snorted puffs of steam through his broad nostrils and took a few solid paces forward so that Will was able to stumble out into the river road and grasp at his tree-like leg. The water came almost to his thighs, but he was so wet from the rain already that it made little difference. There was no saddle on the great horse, only a sodden blanket, but with astonishing strength, old George leaned down and heaved at his hand, and with much struggling he was up. The light from the sign strapped to his wrist did not waver through all the turning and twisting, but remained directly firmly forwards at the way they should go. Will slipped and slithered on the broad back too wide for his straddling. George tugged him to sit in front, astride the great curving neck. "Polly's shoulders have taken greater weight than you," he shouted in Will's ear. Then they were swaying forward as the stolid cart horse lurched off again, splashing through the growing stream, away from the Rook's Wood, away from the Stanton's house. "Where are we going?" Will yelled, staring fearfully out at the darkness. He could see nothing anywhere, only the swirling water and the light of the signs. "We go to raise the hunt," the cracked old voice said close to his ear. "The hunt? What hunt?" "George, I must find Mary. They've got Mary somewhere, and I lost sight of Paul." "We go to raise the hunt," the voice at his back said steadily. "I have seen Paul. He is safe on his way home by now. Mary you will find in due course. It is time for the hunter. Will, the white horse must come to the hunter, and you must take her there. This is the ordering of things. You have forgotten. The river is coming to the valley, and the white horse must go to the hunter, and then we shall see what we shall see. We have work to do, Will, work!" And the rain beat down on them harder, and somewhere distant thunder rumbled in the early night, as the huge Shire horse Pollux splashed patiently on through the rising brown river that had once been Honeycomb Lane. It was impossible to tell where they were. A wind was rising, and Will could hear the sounds of swaying trees above the steady churning of Pollux's feet. Scarcely a light showed in the village. He supposed that the electric power must be cut off, either by accident or by the agent of the dark. In any case, most of the people of this part of the village was still at the manor. "Where's Merriman?" he called through the loud rain. "At the manor," George shouted in his ear, "with Farmer. Beset." "You mean they're trapped?" Will's voice turned shrill with alarm. Old George said, hissing close, hard to hear, "They hold detention so we may work, and floods make them busy too. Look down, boy." In the churning water, the light from the sign showed a scatter of cardboard boxes, a bright red candle, some tangled strands of ribbon. Suddenly, Will recognized one piece of ribbon, a lurid purple and yellow check, as a wrapping he had seen Mary carefully pull off a parcel and roll up on Christmas Day. She was a great hoarder, like a squirrel. This had gone into her hoard. "Those things are from our house, George."
"Flood's there too," the old man said. "Land's low, no danger though, be easy, just water and mud."
Will knew he was right. But again he longed to see for himself. Rushing about, they would all be moving furniture and rugs, clearing books and everything movable. These first floating objects must have escaped before anyone noticed the water was actually carrying things off. Pollux stumbled for the first time, and Will clutched at the wet chestnut mane. For a moment he had almost slipped and been carried off himself. George made soothing noises, and the big horse sighed and snuffled through his nose. Will could see a few dim lights now that must come from the bigger houses on high ground at the end of the village. That meant that they must be nearing the common, if it was still the common and not a lake. Something was changing. He blinked. The water seemed further away, harder to see. Then he realized that the light from the signs linked on his wrist was growing dim. Fading away to nothing. In a moment, they were in darkness. As soon as the light had died, old George said softly, "Whoa, Polly!" and the great Shire horse splashed to a halt and stood there with the water rippling past his legs. George said,
"This is where I have to leave you, Will."
"Oh," Will said, forlorn.
"This is the one instruction," old George said, "that you are to take the white horse to the hunter. That will happen if you fall into no trouble, and there are 2 bits of advice to keep you from trouble. Just from me to you. The first, that you will find enough light to see by if you stand for a count of 100 after I am gone. The second is to remember what you already know, that moving water is free of magic." He patted Will comfortingly on the shoulder. "Put the signs around your waist again now," he said, "and get down." It was a wet business getting down. Worse than getting up. Pollux was so high from the ground that Will splashed into the water like a falling brick. Yet he felt no cold. Though the rain beat at him still, he was gentle, and in some curious way it seemed to keep him from being chilled. Old George said again, "I go to gather the hunt, and with no other word of farewell," he sent Pollux splashing off again towards the common, and he was gone. Will clambered up the snowbank beside the river road, found space to stand without toppling, and began counting up to 100. Before he had reached 70, he began to see what old George had meant. Gradually, the dark world was taking on a glimmer of light from within itself. The rushing water, the pitted snow, the gaunt trees, he could see them all in a gray, dead light like dawn. And while he looked round puzzling, something floating past him on the quick stream brought him such astonishment that he almost fell into the water again. He saw the antlers first, turning lazily from side to side as if the great head were nodding to itself. Then the colors showed, the bright blues and yellows and reds, just as he had first seen them on Christmas morning. He could not see the details of the strange face, the bird-like eyes, the pricked ears of the wolf, but it was this carnival head without a doubt, the inexplicable present that the old Jamaican had given Stephen to give to him, his most precious possession in the world. Will let out a noise like a sob and leapt forward desperately to seize it before the water carried it out of reach. But he slipped as he jumped, and by the time he had recovered his balance, the bright, grotesque head was bobbing out of sight. Will began to run along the bank. It was a thing of the old ones, and from Stephen, and he had lost it. He must at all costs get it back, but memory caught him in mid-stride, and he paused. "The second thing," old George had said, "is to remember that moving water is free of magic." The head was in moving water, only too clearly, so as long as it remained there, no one could harm it or use it for the wrong ends. This is why it's important to pay attention to instructions. This is why it's important. Reluctantly, Will put it out of his mind. The great open common stretched before him, lit by a strange glimmer of its own. Nothing moved, even the cattle that normally graze there year-round, looming up out of nowhere on misty days like solid ghosts, were away under cover now on the farms, driven off by the snow. Will moved on carefully, then the noise of the river that had been in his ears for so long began to change, growing louder. And before him, the torrent-filling Honeycomb Lane turned aside, joining a tiny local stream that had swollen now into a foaming river rushing over the common and away. The road that had been the river road wound up unhindered, solid and gleaming. Old George, Will sensed, had gone that way. He would have liked to take that road too, but he felt that he was to stay with the river through the extra sense of the old ones. He knew that it would show him how to take the white horse to the hunter. But who was the hunter, and where was the white horse? Will went gingerly forward, along the lumpy snowbank edging the new swollen stream. Willows lined it squat and pollard. Then suddenly, out of the dark line of trees on the far side of the stream, a white shape leapt. There was a glimmer of silver in the darkness that was not quite dark, and in a spray of wet snow, the great white mare of the light was standing before Will, her breath clouding round the streaks of rain. She was tall as a tree, her mane blown away wild by the wind. Will touched her gently. "Will you carry me?" he said in the old speech, "as you did before?" The wind spurted as he spoke, and bright lightning flashed jagged around the edge of the sky, closer than it had been. The white horse shuddered, her head jerking up, but she relaxed again almost at once, and Will too felt instinctively that this brewing thunderstorm was not a storm of the dark. It was expected. It was a part of what was to come. The light was rising before the dark could rise. He made sure the signs were secure in his belt, and then as once before he reached up to wind his fingers in the long coarse hair of the white mane. Instantly his head spun in giddiness, and clear but far off he heard his same music, bell-like and haunting, the same heart-catching phrase, till with a great jolt the world turned, the music vanished, and he was up on the back of the white mare, high among the willow trees. Lightning was flickering all around the growling sky now. Muscles bunched in the tremendous back beneath Will, and he gripped the long mane as the horse leapt across the common, out over the hillocks and ravines of snow, its hooves grazing the surface to leave a wake of icy spray. Through the rush of the wind, he thought, as he clung close to the mare's arched neck, that he could hear a strange, high yelping in the wind, like the sound of a migrating geese flying high. The sound seemed to curve around them and then to go on ahead, dying out of range. The white horse leapt high. Will clung tighter as they rose over hedges, roads, walls, all emerging from the melting snow. Then a new noise, louder than the wind or the thunder, was in his ears, and he saw glinting, ruffled black glass ahead of them, and he knew that they had come to the Thames. The river was far wider than he'd ever seen it here. For more than a week it had been shut tight and narrow by icy walls of overhanging snow. Now it had broken loose, foaming and roaring with great chunks of snow and ice tossing like icebergs. This was not a river. It was a fury of water. It hissed and growled, and it was not reasonable. As he looked, Will was frightened as he had never been by the Thames. It was as wild as a thing of the dark could be, out of his knowledge or control. Yet he knew it was not of the dark, but beyond either light or dark, one of the ancient things from the beginning of time. The ancient things, fire, water, stone, wood, and then, after the beginning of men, bronze and iron. The river was loose and would go on according to his will. The river will come to the valley, Merriman had said. The white mare paused irresolute on the edge of the wild, cold water, then surged forward and leapt. It was only as they rose over the churning river that Will saw the island, an island where none had been before in this swollen torrent, divided by large, strange, glinting channels. He thought as the white horse jolted him to earth again among bare, dark trees, "It's a hill, really, a piece of high ground cut off by the water," and suddenly he knew very clearly that he would meet great danger here. This was his place of testing. This island was not an island. Once more he looked up into the sky and silently, desperately called for Merriman, but Merriman did not come, and no word or sign for him came into Will's mind. Fire, water, stone, wood, bronze, and iron. I'm pretty sure there's one more sign. I guess Will hasn't found it yet. I'm pretty sure he hasn't found it yet. But anyway, we're going to get to that point. They're all important for the last 3 books of this series, because we're in book 2 and we're going to be finishing this fairly soon, actually. Oh wow. Okay, so we literally have 1 chapter left after this on Wednesday, and then we can go into the next book, which The Green Witch is pretty short, but still a wonderful novel. So let's continue. The storm was not breaking yet, and the wind had dropped a little, and the noise of the river was louder than all else. The white mare bent her long neck, and Will scrambled awkwardly down. Through the mounded snow, sometimes ice-hard and sometimes soft enough to drop him thigh-deep, he set out to explore his strange island. He had thought it a circle, but it was shaped like an egg, its highest point at the end where the white mare stood. Trees grew round the foot. Above them was an open snowy slope. Above that, a cap of rough shrub, dominated by a single gnarled ancient beech tree. Out of the snow at the foot of this great tree, most perplexing, 4 streams ran down over the hill island, dividing it into 4 quarters. The white horse stood motionless. Thunder rumbled out of the flickering sky. Will climbed to the old beech tree and stood watching the nearest spring foam out from beneath a huge snow-mounted root, and the singing began. It was wordless. It came in the wind. It was a thin, high, cold whine with no definable tune or pattern. It came from a long way off, and it was not pleasant to hear, but it held him transfixed, tuning his thoughts away from their proper direction, turning them away from everything except contemplation of whatever happened to be closest at hand. Will felt he was growing roots like the tree above him. As he listened to the singing, he saw a twig on a low branch of the beech close to his head that seemed for no reason so totally enthralling that he could do nothing but gaze at it, as if it contained the whole world. He stared for so long, his eyes moving very gradually along the tiny twig and back again, and then he felt as if several months had passed, while the high, strange singing went on and on in the sky from its distant beginnings, and then suddenly it stopped, and he was left standing dazed with his nose almost touching a very ordinary beech twig. He knew that the dark had its own way of putting even an old one outside time for a space, if they needed a space for their own magic. For before him, next to the trunk of the great beech tree, stood Hawken. He was more recognizably Hawken now than still the walker in age. Will felt that he was looking at 2 men in one. Hawken was dressed still in his green velvet coat. It seemed still fresh with a touch of white lace at the neck. But the figure within the coat was no longer neat and lithe. He was small, bent, and shrunk by age, and the face was lined and battered beneath long, wispy gray hair. The centuries that had beaten at Hawken had left only its sharp, bright eyes unchanged. Those eyes looked at Will now with cold hostility across the mounded snow.
"Your sister is here,"
Hawken said. Will could not stop himself from glancing quickly round the island, but it was empty as before. He said coldly,
"She is not here. You're not going to catch me with a silly trick like that."
The eyes narrowed.
"You are arrogant," Hawken hissed. "You do not see all that is to be known in the world, old one with the gift, and nor do your masters. Your sister Mary is here in this place, though she is not to be seen by you. This is a meeting for the only bargain that my lord the rider will make. Your sister for the signs. You scarcely have much choice. You people are good at risking the lives of others." The bitter old mouth curved up in a sneer. "But I do not think Will Stanton would enjoy watching his sister die."
Will said, "I can't see her. I still don't believe she's here." Staring at him, Hawken said to the empty air,
"Master?"
And at once the high, wordless singing began again, catching Will back into the slow contemplation that was warm and relaxing as the summer sun, but at the same time horrible in its soft clutch of the mind. It changed him while he was listening, made him forget the tension of fighting for the light, submerged him this time in watching the way the shadows and hollows made patterns on a patch of snow near his feet. He stood there loose and relaxed, gazing at a point of white ice here, a hollow of darkness there, and the singing whined in his ears like the wind through the chinks in a crumbling house. And then again it stopped, and there was nothing, and Will saw with a shock like a sudden cold that he was staring not at a pattern of a mere shadows on snow, but the lines and curves of his sister Mary's face, that she lay on the snow in the clothes she had worn when he last saw her, alive and unharmed, but gazing blankly up at him without any sign that she recognized him or knew where she was. Indeed, Will thought unhappily he did not know where she was either, for although he was being shown in the appearance of her, it was most unlikely that she was really there lying in the snow. He moved to touch her, and as he expected, she vanished completely away, and only the shadows lay on the snow as before.
You see, said Hawken, unmoving beside the beech tree, there are some things that the dark can do, many things, over which you and your masters have no control at all.
That's pretty obvious, Will said. Otherwise there wouldn't be such a thing as the dark, would there? We could just tell it to go away. Hawkins smiled, unruffled. He said softly,
But it will never go away. Once it comes, it breaks all resistance into nothing, and the dark will always come, my young friend, and always win. As you see, we have your sister now. You will give me the signs.
Give them to you? Will said with scorn. To a worm who crawled to the other side? Never. He saw the fist clench briefly at the cuffs of the green velvet jacket. But this was an old Hawken not to be drawn. He had himself under control now that he was no longer the wandering walker, but part of the dark. There was only a small catch of fury in the voice.
You would do well to deal with the messenger of the dark, boy. If you will not, you may call up more than you will wish to see.
The sky flickered and rumbled, bringing a brief bright light to the dark roaring water all around. The great tree peaking the tiny island, the bowed, green-jacketed figure beside its trunk. Oh, sorry, y'all, I'm good. Just had to yawn. My apologies. Will said, You are a creature of the dark. You chose betrayal. You are nothing. I will not deal with you. Hawkins' face twisted as he stared venomously at him, and then looked towards the dark, empty common and called, Master! Then he, again, in an angry shriek this time, Master! Will stood tranquil, waiting on the edge of the island. He saw the white mirror of the light, almost invisible against the snow, raise her head and sniff the air, snorting softly. She looked once towards Will as if in communication, then wheeled round in the direction from which they had come and galloped away. Within seconds something came, and there was no sound still but the rushing river and the grumbling, looming storm. The thing that came was utterly silent. It was huge, a column of black mist, like a tornado, whirling at enormous speed upright between the land and the sky. At either end it seemed broad and solid, but the center wavered, grew slender, and then thicker again. It wove to and fro as it came. And in a kind of macabre dance, it was a hole in the world, this whirling black specter, a piece of the eternal emptiness of the dark made visible. As it came closer and closer to the island, bending and weaving, Will could not help backing away. Every part of him shouted silently in alarm. The black pillars swayed before him, covering the whole island. Its swirling, silent mist did not change, but parted, and standing within it was the Black Rider. He stood with the mist wreathing around his hands and head, and smiled at Will, a cold, mirthless smile with the heavy bars of eyebrows furrowed and ominous above. He was all in black again, but the clothes were unexpectedly modern. He wore a heavy black donkey jacket and rough, dark denim trousers. Without a flicker in his chill smile, he moved aside a little, and out of the snaking black mist of the column came his horse, the great black beast with fiery eyes, and on its back sat Mary. Hello, Will, Mary said cheerfully. Will looked at her. Hello. I suppose you're looking for me, Mary said. I hope nobody got worried. I only went for a little ride and just for a minute or two. I mean, when I went looking for Max, and then I met Mr. Middleton and found Dad had sent him to look for me. Well, obviously it was all right. I had a lovely ride. It's a super horse, and such a lovely day now. The thunder rumbled behind the massing gray-black cloud. Will shifted unhappily, the rider watching him, and said loudly,
Here's some sugar for the horse, Mary. I think he deserves it, don't you?
And he held out his hand, empty. Oh, thank you, Mary said eagerly. She leaned forward over the horse's neck and took the imaginary sugar from the rider's hand. As she reached down beside the stallion's mouth and the animal licked briefly at her palm, Mary beamed. There, she said. Isn't that good? The Black Rider still gazed at Will, his smile widening a little. He opened his palm in mockery of Mary, lying in it. Will saw a small white box made of the icy, translucent glass, with lines of runic symbols engraved on the lid.
Here I have her, old one, said the rider, his nasal, accented voice softly triumphant. Caught by the marks of the old spell of Lear that was written long ago on a certain ring and then lost. You should have looked more closely at your mother's ring, you and that simple craftsman, your father, and Lion, your careless master.
careless under that spell. I have your sister bound by totem magic and yourself bound too, powerless to rescue her. See? He flicked the little box open, and Will saw lying in it a round, delicately curved piece of wood wound about with a fragile gold ring thread. With dismay, he remembered the only ornament that had been missing from the Christmas collection, carved by Farmer Dawson for the Stanton family, and the golden hair that Mr. Middleton, his father's visitor, had with casual curiosity flicked away from Mary's sleeve. A birth sign and a hair of the head are excellent totems, the writer said. In the old days when we were all less sophisticated, you could of course work the magic even through the ground a man's foot had trod, or where his shadow had passed, Will said. But the dark casts no shadow, the writer said softly. And an old one has no birth sign, said Will. Excuse me, somebody's talking about me. He saw uncertainty flicker over the intent white face. The rider shut the white box and slipped it into his pocket. Nonsense, he said curtly. Will looked at him thoughtfully. He said, The Masters of the Light do nothing without a reason, Ryder. Even though the reason may not be known for years and years, 11 years ago, Farmer Dawson of the Light carved a certain sign for me at my birth. And if he had made the sign with the letter of my name as the tradition was, then perhaps you could have used it to trap me into your power. But he made it in the sign of the light, a circle cut by a cross. As you know well, the dark can use nothing of that shape for its own purpose. It is forbidden. He looked at the rider. He said, I think you're trying to bluff me again, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Middleton, Black Rider of the Black Horse? The rider scowled. Yet still you are powerless, he said, for I have your sister, and you cannot save her except by giving me the signs. Malignance glittered again in his eyes. Your great and noble book may have told you that I cannot harm those who are of the same blood as an old one. But look at her. She will do anything that I suggest she should do. Even jump into the swollen Thames. There are parts of the craft that you people neglect, you know. It is so simple to persuade folks into sometimes situations where they bring accidents upon themselves. Like your mother, for instance. So clumsy. He smiled at Will again. Will stared back, hating him. Then he looked at Mary's happy, sleepy, waking face and ached that she should be in such a state. He thought, and all because she's my sister. All because of me. But a silent voice said into his mind, not because of you, because of the light. Because of all that must always happen to keep the dark from rising. And with a surge of joy, Will knew that he was no longer alone, that because the rider was abroad, Merriman was nearby again, too, free to give help if need be. The rider put out his hand. This is the time for your bargain, Will Stanton. Give me the signs. Will took the deepest breath of his life and let it out slowly. He said, No. Astonishment was an emotion that the Black Rider forgot long ago. The piercing blue eyes stared at Will in total disbelief. But you know what I shall do? Yes, Will said. I know, but I will not give you the signs. For a long moment the rider looked at him, and out of the vast black pillar of swirling mist in which he stood, his face, incredulity and rage were mingled with a kind of evil respect. Then he swung round to the black horse and to Mary and called aloud some words in a language that Will guessed from the chill that put into his bones must be the spell speech of the dark, seldom used aloud. The great horse tossed his head, white teeth flashing, and bounded forward with happy, witless Mary clutching his mane and gurgling with laughter. He came to the overhanging snowbank, then bordered the river and paused. Will clenched the signs on his belt, agonized by the risk he was taking, and with all his might summoned the power of the light to come to his aid. The black horse gave a shrill, shrieking whinny and leapt high into the air over the Thames. Halfway through his leap, he twisted strangely, bucking in the air, and Mary screamed in terror, grabbing wildly at his neck, but her balance was gone and she fell. Will thought he would faint as she turned through the air, his risk bursting into disaster, but instead of splashing into the river, she fell into the snuff-wet snow at its brink. The Black Rider savagely lunging forward, he never reached her. Before he was in mid-stride, a great arrow of lightning came from the storm amassed, now almost overhead, and a gigantic crack of thunder, and out of the flash and the roaring, a blazing white streak rushed over the island towards Mary, catching her up so that in an instant she was gone, seized away safe. As in baseball, safe! And it's good. Will hardly managed to get a glimpse of Merriman's lean form cloaked and hooded on the white mare of the light. With lean form cloaked and hooded on the white mare of the light, with Mary's blonde hair flying where he held her. Then the storm broke and the whole world whirled flaming round his head. The earth rocked. He saw for an instant Windsor Castle outlined black against a white sky. Lightning seared his eyes. Thunder beat at his head. Then through the singing in his dazed ears, he heard a strange creaking and crackling close by. He swung round. Behind him, the great beech tree was cleft down the middle, blazing with great flames, and he realized with amazement that the eager current of the island's 4 streams was growing less and less, dwindling down to nothing. He looked up fearfully for the black column of the dark, but it was nowhere to be seen in the raging storm, and the strangeness of all else that was happening drove the thought of it out of Will's head. For it was not only the tree that had been split and broken, the island itself was changing, breaking open, sinking towards the river. Will stared speechless, standing now on an edge of snow-mounted land left by the vanished streams, while around him snow and land slid and crumbling into the roaring Thames. Above him he saw the strangest thing of all. Something was emerging out of the island as the land and snow fell away. There came first from what had been the taller end of the island the roughly shaped head of a stag, antlers held high. It was gold and glinting even in the dim light. More came into sight. Will could see the whole stag now, a beautiful golden image prancing. Then came a curious curved pedestal on which it stood, as if to leap away. Then behind this, a long horizontal shape, as long as the island, rising again at the other end to another high gold glinting point, tipped this time by a kind of scroll, and suddenly Will realized that he was looking at a ship, the pedestal with its high curving prow and the stag its figurehead. Astounded, he moved towards it, and imperceptibly the river moved after him, until there was nothing left of the island but the long ship on a last circle of land, with the last rearing snowdrift all around. Will stood starting. He had never seen such a ship. The long timbers from which it was built overlapped one another like the boards of a fence, heavy and broad. They looked like oak. He could see no mast. Instead, there were places for row upon row of oarsmen up and down the whole length of the vessel. In the center was a kind of deckhouse that made the ship look almost like a Noah's Ark. It was not a closed structure. Its sides seemed to have been cut away, leaving the corner beams and a roof like a canopy. And inside, beneath the canopy, a king lay. Will drew back a little at the sight of him. The mailed figure lay very still, with sword and shield at his side, and treasure piled around him in glittering mounds. He wore no crown. Instead, a great engraved helmet covered the head and most of the face, crested by a heavy silver image of a long-snouted animal that Will thought must be a wild boar. But even without a crown, this was clearly the body of a king. No lesser man could have merited the silver dishes and jeweled purses, the great shield of bronze and iron, the ornate scabbard with gold-rimmed drinking horns, and the heaps of ornaments. On an impulse, Will knelt down in the snow and bowed his head in respect, and as he looked up again rising, he saw over the gunwale of the ship something he had not noticed before. The king was holding something in his hands, where they lay tranquility folded in his breast. It was another ornament, small and glittering, and as Will saw it more closely, he stood still as stone, gripping the high oaken edge of the ship. The ornament in his quiet hands of the long ship king was shaped as a circle quartered by a cross. It was wrought of iridescent glass, engraved with serpents and eels and fishes, waves and clouds and things of the sea. It called silently to Will. It was without any question the sign of water, the last of the great 6 signs. Or the 6 great signs. So now he has all 6. Because I was like, there's 6 signs. I know there are. Will scrambled over the side of the great ship and approached the king. He had taken care where his feet moved, or he would have crushed fine work of engraved leather and woven robes, and jewelry of enamels and cloisoned and filigree gold. He stood looking down for a moment at the white face half hidden by the ornate helmet, and then he reached reverently across to take the sign. But first he had to touch the hand of the dead king, and it was colder than any stone. Will flinched and drew back hastily. Merriman's face said softly from close by,
Do not fear him.
Will swallowed. But he's dead.
He has lain here in his burial ground for 1,500 years, waiting. On any other night of the year, he would not be here at all. He would be dust. Yes, Will, this appearance of him is dead. The rest of him has gone out beyond time long since.
But it's wrong to take tribute away from the dead.
It is the sign. If it had not been the sign, and destined for you, the sign seeker, it would not be here to give it to you. Take it. Excuse me.
So Will leaned against the bier and took the sign of water from the loose grip of the dead cold hands, and from somewhere far off a murmur of his music whispered in his ears and then was gone. He turned to the side of the ship. There beside it was Merriman, sitting on the white mare. He was cloaked in dark blue, and with his white, wild hair uncovered, the hollows of his bony face were dark with strain. With delight gleamed in his eyes.
It was well done, Will, he said.
Will was gazing at the sign in his hands. The sheen over it was the iridescent of all mother of pearl, all rainbows. The light danced on it in its danced on water. It's beautiful, he said. Rather reluctantly, he loosened the end of the belt and slipped the side of water on to lie next to the glimmering side of fire.
It is one of the oldest, Merriman said, and the most powerful. Now that you have it, they loose their power over Mary forever. That spell is dead. Come, we must go.
Concern sharpened his voice. He had seen Will grasp hastily at a beam at the longship, suddenly, unexpectedly lurched to one side. It rose upright, swayed a little, then tipped in the opposite direction. Will saw, scrambling for the side, that the Thames had risen still further while he was not watching. Water lapped around the great ship and had almost afloat. Not for long now would the dead king rest on the land that had once been an island. The mare wheeled towards him, snuffling a greeting, and in the same enchanted, music-haunting moment as before, Will was up on the white horse of the light, sitting in front of Merriman. The ship tilted and swung fully afloat now, and the white horse wheeled out of its way, stand nearby, watching the river water foaming around its sturdy legs. Creaking and rattling, the long ship gave itself to the rush of the swollen Thames. It was too large a vessel to be overwhelmed. Its weight kept it steady even on that swirling water, once it had found a balance. So the mysterious dead king lay in dignity still, among his weapons and gleaming tribute, and Will had a last glimpse of the mask-like white face as the great ship moved away downstream. He said over his shoulder, "Who is he?" There was a grave respect on Merriman's face as he watched the long ship gold.
An English king of the Dark Ages. I think we will not use his name. The Dark Ages were rightly named. A shadowy time for the world when the Black Riders rode unhindered over all land. Only the old ones and a few noble brave men like this one kept the light alive.
And he was buried in a ship like the Vikings. Will was watching the light glimmer on the golden stack of the prow.
He was part Viking himself, Merriman said. There were 3 great ship burials near this Thames of yours in days past. One was dug up in the last century near Taplow and destroyed in the process. One was the Ship of the Light, not destined ever to be found by man. And one was the greatest ship of the greatest king of all, and thus they have not found and perhaps never will. It lies in peace. He stopped abruptly, and at a moment of his hand, the white horse turned, ready to leap away from the river to the south. But Will was still straining to watch the long ship, and something of his tension seemed to infect both horse and master. They paused. In that moment, an extraordinary streak of blue light came hurtling out of the east, not from the thundering sky, but from somewhere across the common. It struck the ship. A great silent rush of flame burst there over the broad river and its craggy white banks, and from prow to stern, the king's ship was outlined by leaping fire. Will gave a choking, wordless cry, and the white horse stirred uneasily, pawing at the snow. Behind him, Will, Merriman's strong, deep voice said, They vent their spite, because they know they are too late. Very easy it is now and then to predict what the dark will do.
Will said, "But the king and all his beautiful things." If the writer paused for thought, Will thought, he would have known that this outburst of malice had done nothing more than create a right and proper ending for this great ship. When the king's father died, he was laid in a ship in the same way, with all his most splendid possessions around him. But the ship was not buried. This was not the way. The king's men set fire to it and set it off, burning alone over the sea, a tremendous sailing pyre. And that look is what our king of the last sign is doing now, sailing in fire and water to his long rest down the greatest river of England towards the sea. "And good rest to him," Will said softly, turning his eyes at last from the leaping flames. But for a long time afterwards, wherever they went, they could see the glow from the blazing longship whitening a part of the storm-dark sky. And that is where we will end for tonight. I bid you all a splendid afternoon. Thank you all so much for watching. Love you and appreciate you. See you next time. Bye-bye.